So good evening and welcome to this conference convened by the Institute to consider how Australian agriculture should respond to the challenges and opportunities that are increasingly arising in domestic and global agricultural markets. We've titled this conference, Can Productive Agriculture Also Be Consumer Friendly?, in an attempt to highlight the dilemmas that frequently arise in seeking to increase agricultural productivity.
So let's take a look at the retail landscape today as we see it. So we're a market of duopoly. They call Australia a treasure island. Retailers overseas and suppliers overseas call this market a treasure island because of the high concentration that we operate in. You know, we're largely dominated by two major retailers who probably account for about 2/3 of the total fresh produce and fresh, food dollar sales.
So we need to inform and promote. Conventional production, technology, these things have the ability to alleviate hunger. We need to do that while we preserve choice for other consumers. It is socially irresponsible to impose choice restrictions on consumers that are driving the current inflation rates we have today, en masse. And I say that en masse because I absolutely believe that niche markets are great and they provide a lot of opportunities. But I'm saying we need to be careful that we don't shift our entire production base chasing these small consumer groups.
There's the data on agricultural productivity in Australia right up to present times. And that is not a pretty picture because, as we've already heard, there's a requirement worldwide for productivity to be increasing, and Australia's in the position where, irrespective of your views on climate change, we're rapidly approaching value of imports equaling value of exports and facing declining productivity. There are plenty of arguments as to why we're facing declining opportunity, not the least of which has been that the money invested in R&D in real terms in the agricultural areas has fallen off in the last 10 years or so.
But let's look a little bit closer at Australia's food system. Australia's food system currently and for the foreseeable future depends on imports. This is despite the fact that Australia is a net exporter of protein and calories, in fact vastly so. We support somewhere between 60 and 80 million consumers around the world, and of course there's only 20 million consumers in Australia. So we're a net exporter of protein and calories, but our food manufacturing sector is heavily dependent on specialised ingredients, additives and processing aids. That's if we are to maintain the food supply and the food security and the nature of the food supply in Australia as it is now. We would not enjoy our chocolate Tim Tams if we couldn't import cocoa, because to the best of my knowledge we don't produce any cocoa in Australia.
I think choice approached the debate having spent years campaigning against what we see as the growing anti-competitiveness of Australia's grocery sector. So it's a market with some of the highest levels of concentration and highest relative prices in the world, at least in the developed world. And when we talk about consumer expectations and the subject of this segment, concerns with supermarkets regularly rank among the top concerns of Choice members. If we go back to even Choice's founding issues back in 1960, aside from reviewing things like aspirin and weight loss cures, food and grocery prices are sitting right there as a concern. There are things that just have not changed over time.
Are we going to work with 6.9 billion individual consumers? Let's see, that's about 7,000 languages. It's about 900 major ones across a pretty diverse range of cultures. It's possible, but there's a lot of work out there. Are we going to work with 1.5 billion producers? Again, it's a daunting task. But it's very important because growers are the people, not just with the actual ability to make the practice changes that we're looking for, but they also have the solutions and the technologies that we require to develop sustainable agriculture and deliver environmental benefits. We believe that the key may actually lie in the middle. Through our work on market transformation, we've identified the fact that 300 to 500 companies control 70% or more of the trade of each of those 15 priority commodities. If we work with them, if we change the behaviour of those companies, then the rest will happen automatically.
Back to 1944 versus 2007, it took, to produce 27.2 kilograms of milk, took 4 animals in 1944. Only took 1 in 2007. And this is the other reductions. That bar on the right, that's the quadrupling of milk production. To produce a given amount of milk, whether it's a hundredweight or a hectoliter or whatever it is, requires 21% fewer animals today than in 1944, 23% less feed, 35% less water, 10% less land, 24% less of the manure is produced. The carbon footprint of that unit of milk went down 63%, and the overall production unit reduced its carbon footprint by 41%.
What about organic and free range? And I think we've already heard today some mention of organic free range not necessarily going hand in hand with sustainability. One would often, consumers think, well, farming methods like that must be better for the environment. Well, in fact, this is not the case. Free range using more space and being less efficient in terms of feed conversion and growth rates is essentially a significantly greater burden to the environment, and organic is yet another increase. According to this particular study, and I'm not showing the figures here, if I remember correctly, we are talking about increases of the order of 20% in terms of global warming potential. So there are significant differences.
But when it comes to animal welfare, are consumers getting what they're asking for? Does the label on the product match their expectations? Farm fresh, grain-fed, grass-fed, biodynamic, organic, free-range, bred-free range, these are all terms that are used to distinguish one product from another. But terms like free-range are not legally defined, so they're open to interpretation and are able to be moulded to suit a particular production system.
I'm still fairly young, but we go through whole phases of planting trees, salinity, acidity, biodiversity, carbon, whatever else. These are all partial measures. We fundamentally need to use standards that are based ecologically soundly. We don't need to partition the complex ecological situation into a whole lot of different compartments and then say we've got a measure of ecological sustainability. We need to avoid that fragmentation.
When you go and buy your morning coffee, for example, do you look to understand a bit more about where it comes from? A lot of people now are picking the coffee that's 100% Arabica bean, or it's free trade, or my milk is locally grown. And for some people, when they look at their cup of coffee, they can actually look at it this way. And if you're really clever, you know, in some sense, particularly in a local market, you might be able to trace that back to the cow. So when I bought a coffee a few years ago, it wasn't anything like this, but it's fast becoming our reality.
Now, in the 60s, the environmental movement sort of got started, and we went through a period where everyone got in trenches. Like, industry was saying, we'll all be broke. Consumers were saying, or environmentalists were saying, we'll all be dead. And neither of those things happened. We had to work our way through and have to recognise that there were good ideas and good points of view on both sides. And I think this issue we're facing now, we all recognise world population is going to grow. There's new technologies. Somehow we've got to muddle our way through this and do what's happened in relation to a lot of environmental issues where we've come out with a better system and we've still got businesses that are viable. So I think that's a bit of a message. Tomorrow we've got to not get in trenches. We've got to find what's the good ideas on both sides of the debate and make sure consumers and society get the benefit of that.